The cold wind howled across the Carpathians, dragging frost over pine and stone. In the dark cradle of Eastern Europe, where mist never lifts and mountains watched like sentinels, a child was born beneath a winter sky. Not in a palace, not in peace, but in a time of war, betrayal, and blood. My name is Vlad. History remembers me by other names. Dracula, Țepeș, the Impaler. To some, I was a butcher, a tyrant. To others, a guardian, the last wall between Christendom and the crescent moon of the Ottomans. But I was never meant to be a myth. I was meant to be a ruler. They say I ruled with cruelty. But they do not speak of the wolves that circled Wallachia. Not beasts, but kings, boyars, sultans, and warlords. Men with armies at their backs and daggers behind their smiles. Wallachia was not a kingdom. It was a wound between empires, Hungary to the west, the Ottomans to the east, a place where oaths meant nothing and death came quicker than trust. I was born into this wound, born the son of Vlad Dracula, the dragon, sworn to the order of the dragon, protectors of Christendom. He passed me his name and all his enemies. I was taken hostage as a boy, watched my brother fall under the sway of the enemy, saw my father murdered, my elder brother buried alive. They taught me power, not through books, but through chains, through fear, through the silence of betrayal. And when I returned, I did not come as a prince. I came as a storm. This story is not one of fantasy, not of vampires or Gothic legends. It is real, it is sharp, it is soaked in iron and fire. This is my story. Not the one you've been told, but the one I lived, and I alone will tell it. So remember what you hear next, because every word comes from the mouth of the man they feared to write truthfully about. I am Vlad, and this is the reckoning of the Impaler. I was born in the heart of winter in the year 1431, within the stone walls of Sighișoara, a fortress town carved out on a Transylvanian hill, ringed by frost and looming evergreens. Transylvania then was no peaceful province, but a mosaic of cultures and ambitions, ruled by the Kingdom of Hungary, a realm struggling to hold back the Ottoman tide that spilled westward like a dark flood. My father, Vlad II, was a man forged by this crucible. Known to history as Vlad Dracula, the dragon, his name was not mere pride, but an order bestowed by Emperor Sigismund himself, leader of the Order of the Dragon. This chivalric brotherhood was dedicated to the defense of Christendom against the growing Muslim Ottoman menace, a sacred duty that shaped my father's every choice and, by extension, mine. Our bloodline, the Draculaic branch of the Basarab dynasty, was a shard of flame in Wallachia's fragmented crown. The Principality of Wallachia was a land of rugged Carpathian foothills and fertile Danubian plains, a borderland not just between empires but between faiths and cultures. Eastern Orthodox peasants and boyars, Catholic Hungarian nobles, and the encroaching Muslim Ottomans. The boyars, Wallachia's noble elite, were a turbulent class, wielding local power like fractious lords of feudal castles, often more loyal to their own wealth and survival than to the prince or the realm. I recall my mother as a quiet, watchful woman whose origins are lost to history's shadows, but her resilience etched itself into my soul. Around me, my brothers played and learned the rough arts of nobility. Mircea, my eldest, was steady and just, a heart that sought honor amid chaos. Radu, the middle, was charismatic, and though easily swayed, his charm would later serve him in dark ways. Then there was Vlad the monk, whose shadow I would come to feel in years yet to come. Growing up amidst these fractured loyalties and ever-present threats, my childhood was never one of simple joys. The cold, crisp mountain air filled my lungs with the scent of pine and smoke from distant hearth fires. The clatter of armor and the clamor of church bells marked my days, Orthodox chants mixing with Catholic Latin prayers, underscoring a land divided not just by politics, but by faith. My education began early, under tutors who drilled into me the histories of empires and the harsh lessons of power. But it was the wars, the betrayals, and the fierce necessity of survival that truly schooled me. To be a prince in Wallachia was to dance on a blade's edge between life and death, loyalty and treachery. At 11 years old, my world was torn apart by the ruthless chessboard of power that defined Eastern Europe. In 1442, my father, Vlad II Dracula, made a decision that would mark me for life and carve my soul with bitter resolve. To secure a fragile peace with the Ottoman Empire, the rising colossus to the southeast, he delivered me and my brother Radu as political hostages to the court of Sultan Murad II. I was taken far from the frost-bitten hills of Transylvania to the balmy city of Edirne, the Ottoman capital before Constantinople's fall. There, beneath the minarets and domes, I became a prisoner of statecraft and survival. But it was no ordinary captivity. At the Ottoman court, I was forced to learn not only their language, but their ways, their rituals, their military discipline, their faith. I was made to witness the might of an empire forged by steel and faith, where janissaries, the Sultan's elite infantry, drilled like relentless machines, and cavalrymen swept like storms across plains. Radu, ever adaptable, succumbed to their allure, a favored son embraced by the Sultan's household, forming bonds that would later divide us. I, however, hardened like tempered steel. I learned to observe, to listen, to wait, to see through the veneer of diplomacy the cold calculus beneath. The Ottomans were masters not just of sword and siege, but of psychological warfare, spreading fear to undermine hearts before battle even began. They bribed, they betrayed, they enslaved. Their relentless push into Europe threatened not only my family's hold on Wallachia, but the very fabric of Christendom. In this crucible, I studied their tactics, the use of light cavalry for raiding, the calculated sieges of fortress cities, the supply chains that kept vast armies moving, and the chilling practice of impalement that they employed to deter dissent. Meanwhile, far from Edirne, the halls of Wallachia echoed with violence. In 1447, my father, Vlad II, and elder brother Mircea were murdered in a coup orchestrated by rebellious boyars and abetted by John Hunyadi, the Hungarian warlord whose ambitions shaped much of the region's destiny. Their blood cried out for vengeance. The throne was seized by Vladislav II of the rival Danish branch, leaving my family name broken but not forgotten. From my prison, I vowed I would return. I would reclaim my birthright, but not merely as a prince, as a warrior forged in captivity, tempered by betrayal and sharpened by the fires of vengeance. In 1448, fate handed me a razor-thin opening. The great Hungarian commander John Hunyadi had suffered a crushing defeat at Kosovo Polje, shaking the balance of power in the Balkans. The Ottoman tide momentarily ebbed. The whispers of discontent among Wallachian boyars grew louder, It was time. With the fragile backing of the Ottoman court, a calculated ploy by Murad II to install a ruler they believed pliable, I mounted my first campaign to seize the throne. My forces were meager, my allies few, yet my resolve burned fierce. The campaign was swift and brutal. I swept through the valleys and passes like a dark shadow, rallying those still loyal to the Dracula's name. But the boyars, those self-serving lords who wielded more power than the prince himself, were divided. Many saw me as a mere Ottoman pawn, a child shaped by captivity, unworthy of true rule. Vladislav II, my rival and leader of the rival Donetsk faction, marshaled his own forces and loyalists. His grasp on Wallachia was tighter than I anticipated. Battles were fought not only with swords, but in the tangled alleys of political intrigue, poison, and betrayal. I found myself isolated, the weight of my bloodline a double-edged sword. My brief reign lasted but 2 months, a flicker in the storm. I recall the bitter cold of that autumn, the icy winds whipping through the Carpathians, as I fled from the capital, pursued by forces loyal to my rival. I sought refuge first in Moldavia, then in the protective shadows of Transylvania's fortified towns. Yet defeat was no surrender. It was a lesson carved deep into my spirit. I had come to understand that to rule Wallachia was to command loyalty, not through birthright alone, but through the mastery of fear, strategy, and unyielding will. To be prince was to be predator and judge. In exile, I honed these lessons. I forged alliances in the shadows, studied the terrain that would one day be my battlefield, and bided my time until my enemy's treachery became their undoing. The years that followed my first failed reign were a crucible, a relentless test of patience, cunning, and ruthlessness. From 1448 to 1456, I wandered through the fractured courts and shadowed forests of Eastern Europe, a prince without a throne but possessed by a singular obsession: reclaiming Wallachia. My exile took me first to Moldavia, ruled by Stephen the Great, a warrior prince as relentless as I. Our alliance was uneasy, born from mutual enemies rather than trust, but he granted me sanctuary and soldiers, recognizing in me a bulwark against the Ottoman advance. From Moldavia, I slipped into Transylvania, then under the sway of King Ladislaus V of Hungary, and the powerful regent John Hunyadi. The Hungarian court was a maelstrom of ambition, divided loyalties, and shifting allegiances. Hunyadi himself was a man of steel, whose campaigns against the Ottomans had made him both a hero and a tyrant. I knew that to wrest Wallachia from its grasping boyars and Ottoman puppets, I would need allies, or at least tolerable patrons. The Hungarians saw in me a tool to check Ottoman power south of the Carpathians, but they demanded loyalty and obedience. Yet loyalty in these lands was a currency as fragile as the ice that cracked beneath winter feet. During these years, I meticulously cultivated a network of spies, mercenaries, and boyar defectors. I listened to whispers in taverns, studied the shifting alliances of noble houses, and learned the terrain as a hunter knows his forest. Wallachia itself was a land of harsh contrasts: craggy mountains cloaked in dense forests, dark rivers twisting through fertile valleys, villages of timber and clay where peasants toiled under the ever-watchful eyes of boyar landlords and tax collectors. It was here, amid these forests and valleys, that I began to craft the warfare that would become my signature: guerrilla tactics that leveraged terrain and terror in equal measure. I sent envoys to neighboring powers, negotiating cautiously, with Matthias Corvinus, successor to Hunyadi, and a ruler of both vision and suspicion. With his covert support in 1456, I launched my second campaign. Wallachia was a prize worth the blood. My forces moved swiftly, striking with the ferocity of wolves. The boyars were fractured, many weary of Vladislav II, weak leadership, and Ottoman vassalage. I met Vladislav II on the field in a duel of champions, a rare spectacle in these brutal times, and I emerged victorious, his blood sealing my claim. From the moment I reclaimed the throne, I ruled not as a prince, but as a scourge. Every decision was a statement that Wallachia would no longer bow to foreign powers or treacherous lords. I rebuilt fortresses, reinforced borders, and created an intelligence network unparalleled in the region. The blood of my family demanded vengeance, but my reign demanded more than revenge. It demanded order forged through fear and strength. When I took the throne in 1456, Wallachia was a fractured land of rot and treachery. The boyars, those noble lords whose power rivaled my own, saw the prince as a mere figurehead, a puppet to be manipulated, a tool for their endless feuds. Their greed bled the country dry, their corruption rotted the courts, and their betrayals threatened to tear us apart. I knew the only path to survival and sovereignty was through ruthless authority. Compassion was a luxury Wallachia could no longer afford. At Easter, 1459, I summoned the boyars to Târgoviște, my seat of power and the heart of the principality. The feast was sumptuous, a mask for the nightmare to come. As they reveled in wine and meat, I watched their faces, each a story of betrayal, of greed, of ambition. After the feast, the air grew thick with dread. The old and infirm were the first, impaled alive on towering stakes, their cries a bitter song to warn the others. The rest were forced into exile, marched like cattle to the desolate mountains where they toiled to rebuild the fortress of Poenari. Poenari was no mere castle. It was a monument to my resolve. Perched on a precipice of jagged cliffs, it was virtually impregnable, shielded by steep ravines and dense forests. From its towers, I could watch the roads and valleys through which enemies and allies alike passed, a vantage point from which I commanded my realm. My justice was swift and unyielding. Thieves and traitors met the stake. Corrupt officials were flayed alive, their screams echoing through the courts like a grim anthem. The message was clear. Disorder would not be tolerated. Fear was the currency of power, and I was its master. But fear alone was insufficient. Wallachia stood at the crossroads of empires, and the shadow of the Ottoman Sultan loomed ever larger. I transformed Wallachia's military into a force of shadows and steel. The heavy infantry held the line, cavalry scouted, and struck with lightning speed. But it was in guerrilla warfare that I excelled. The dense Carpathian forests were my allies. I used them to hide small bands of riders who struck Ottoman supply lines before melting back into the trees. Poisoned wells and hidden pits slowed their advance, while scorched earth denied them sustenance. My spies infiltrated enemy camps. I turned deserters and traitors into double agents, sowing confusion in the Sultan's ranks. By 1461, my defiance of the Sultan was no longer a whispered threat, but a roaring challenge. I refused to pay the tribute demanded by Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople and the most formidable ruler of our age. Wallachia's refusal was a spark that threatened to ignite the entire region. Mehmed gathered an army said to number over 100,000 men. the largest force ever assembled against my realm. Against this Leviathan, I commanded fewer than 30,000 warriors, a fraction of the Sultan's host. The odds were as vast as the Carpathians themselves. Yet I embraced the art of war not as a contest of strength, but of wits and will. Wallachia's terrain was my greatest ally, a brutal patchwork of dense forests, sharp ridges, and winding rivers. The Ottoman armies, vast and cumbersome, struggled to adapt to these conditions. I ordered a scorched earth policy, burning crops and villages that might supply the invaders. Water sources were poisoned, wells tainted with corpses to spread disease. Roads were lined with hidden pits, sharpened stakes and traps designed to maim and kill. My cavalry, swift and merciless, harried their flanks and rear, cutting supply lines with lightning raids. I deployed scouts skilled in silent movement, their knowledge of every trail and glade unmatched. On the night of June 17th, 1462, I led a daring assault that would etch itself into legend. Disguised in Ottoman uniforms, a contingent of 7,000 cavalry, my elite vanguard, slipped behind enemy lines near the Ottoman camp at Târgoviște. The plan was audacious. Assassinate Sultan Mehmed II and collapse the invaders' command. We struck with the ferocity of wolves. Flaming arrows ignited tents, bugle calls sowed confusion, and the enemy scrambled in chaos. Though we failed to find Mehmed himself, thousands of Ottoman soldiers fell in the maelstrom. The psychological impact was devastating. When Mehmed finally reached the city, the ground before him was a ghastly tableau. 20,000 impaled corpses, their faces frozen in terror, their bodies arrayed like a macabre forest of death. The Sultan turned back, the vision seared into his mind. My methods earned me fearsome renown. Tales spread of the Impaler who turned the forests into graveyards and whose justice was as swift as it was merciless. This terror was my weapon of choice. It deterred enemies and reminded my people that Wallachia would not fall quietly. But war was not only fought on battlefields. Diplomacy, betrayal, and alliance wove through every decision. The boyars were restless, and my own blood threatened to betray me. In the coming years, these internal and external struggles would define my reign's tragic end. The brutal impalements that later earned me my infamous moniker were not mindless cruelty, but calculated terror, psychological weapons to break the will of the enemy before battle was joined. My men were fierce, but disciplined. I demanded loyalty and courage above all. The Wallachian peasant, hardened by hardship, became a formidable soldier. I knew the Ottomans relied on overwhelming numbers, but numbers meant little when faced with a forest, alive with traps, ambushes, and ghosts. Victory on the battlefield could not shield me from the knives of betrayal that lurked in the halls of my own court and the hearts of those I once called kin. The boyars, ever restless and self-serving, watched me with suspicion and hatred. Many longed for the days when Wallachia bowed to the Ottomans or Hungary, when their power went unchecked and their coffers filled without fear. Worst of all was the betrayal of blood. My own brother, Radu, the handsome, who had spent years in Ottoman captivity and emerged as Mehmed II's favored puppet ruler. Radu's charm and cultivated grace masked a venomous ambition. With Ottoman backing, he returned to Wallachia, promising the boyars peace and prosperity, but only at the price of Wallachian independence. The nobles, torn between fear of my iron fist and hope in Radu's promises, began to fracture. Some defected openly, others conspired in shadows. In 1462, as Mehmed's forces retreated, but remained a looming threat, I faced not only an external enemy, but an internal one. My own army began to splinter, loyalty wavering as boyar leaders and mercenaries weighed which side would best secure their survival and wealth. Radu's forces, bolstered by Ottoman troops, closed in. Outnumbered and betrayed, I fled Wallachia, seeking sanctuary in Transylvania, a land ruled by King Matthias Corvinus, a ruler both pragmatic and merciless. Instead of aid, I found imprisonment. Corvinus, wary of my reputation and fearful of Ottoman reprisal, locked me away in a dark cell, accused of treason forged by my enemy's lies. For 12 years, I rotted in captivity, betrayed by supposed allies, abandoned by those I trusted. Yet the fire within did not die. My resolve only sharpened, tempered by isolation and the bitter taste of betrayal. Radu cel Frumos ruled Wallachia as an Ottoman vassal, his reign a bitter pill for any patriot. The betrayal was personal and political, a fracture of family and nation that would haunt the land for decades. Even in chains, I plotted. History had not finished with me. After 12 years in the cold and darkness of Hungarian captivity, I emerged a changed man, sharpened by suffering, fueled by vengeance, and more determined than ever to reclaim what was mine by birth and blood. In 1475, with the aid of Stephen the Great of Moldavia, a fierce ally and fellow foe of the Ottoman Empire, I mounted my final campaign to retake Wallachia from the grip of Basarab Laiota, Mehmed's latest puppet. The land I returned to was not the same. The fields bore the scars of endless war. The towns were haunted by fear and decay. The boyars, fragmented and corrupt, no longer commanded respect. Yet the call of the dragon stirred within me. With a handful of loyal warriors and the backing of Moldavian forces, I swept into Wallachia with swift precision. My enemies scattered like leaves before a storm. Basarab Laiota fled, and once again I claimed my crown. But my triumph was fleeting. The Ottoman threat remained relentless, their agents still lurking in the shadows. The boyars remained untrustworthy, their loyalty bought and sold like cheap coin. In December 1476, as Ottoman forces pressed into Wallachian lands, I rode out to confront them. Accounts differ. Some say I was betrayed by a trusted noble, others that I fell valiantly in battle. What is certain is that I died sword in hand, a warrior to the end. My severed head was sent to Mehmed II, displayed on a spike in Constantinople, a grim trophy and a warning. Though my reign ended in blood and shadow, my legend was just beginning. I had ruled Wallachia 3 times. First reign, 1448, 2 months. Second reign, 1456 to 1462, 6 years. Third reign, 1476, a few months. I left no peace treaties, no golden age. I left fear, defiance, and a kingdom that refused to bow quietly before empires. Some call me monster. Some call me savior. But I was the dragon's son, and my purpose was to keep the crescent moon from swallowing my land. I am gone, yet my shadow lingers like a storm over these lands, relentless, unyielding, eternal. They call me monster, tyrant, devil. They whisper my name in fear. Dracula, the Impaler. But few know the depths beneath the legend. The son who was forged by exile. The prince who bore the burden of a fractured land. The man who wielded fear not as cruelty, but as a weapon of survival. I ruled Wallachia, not out of lust for power, but out of love for a land imperiled by empires that sought to swallow it whole. My throne was not given. It was carved with iron and blood. Every impaled enemy was a message, not of madness, but of justice. Every fortress rebuilt, a testament to resilience. Every battlefield won, a defiance against oblivion. I was a creature of contradictions, harsh but just, brutal but visionary, feared yet fiercely loyal to my people. My story is not merely of cruelty, but of a desperate struggle to preserve identity, faith, and freedom in a world consumed by conquest. The boyars may have betrayed me, my brothers may have turned against me, and empires may have tried to erase me, but my spirit endures. The forests of Wallachia still whisper my name. The stones of Poenari still stand, silent sentinels to my legacy. I was the dragon's son, born of fire and shadow, and though my flesh has turned to dust, the flame I lit still burns. Wallachia lived, breathed, and resisted because of me. I was never meant to be remembered as a saint, nor should I be. History demands heroes and monsters. But I was both. I was Vlad Țepeș, the Impaler, the dragon's son, a man who fought with fire and shadow to carve a future for my people. And that fight is not over. The fire I lit in these dark forests will forever refuse to die.